Hello, my name is Andrew Keane. Welcome to Keane on America, the daily interview show about the United States. Hello, everybody. There was an interesting piece in the New Yorker a couple of weeks ago. Actually, a couple of months ago. I'm going to start again, Dan. Hello, everybody. A couple of months ago, a very interesting piece in the New Yorker by my guest today, Dan Turello, called The Robot and the Philosopher. It was an essay about photography in some ways, photography and technology, a story of how Turello took the photographs of the humanoid robot Sophia and the tech philosopher David Chalmers. It's part of a book that Turello has out. It's just come out this week. It's called Connection: How Technology Can Make Us Better Humans. Dan Turello is joining us from Washington, D.C., where he lives. Dan, has technology made you a better human, especially your use of photography?
Good to see you, Andrew. Thanks so much for having me on the show. I guess it all depends on what we mean by better, and that was the big. That's always been the big question mark for the title. And I tend to think of technology as a tool that gives us more protected space. It provides a greater sense of agency. It provides more opportunities. It can provide more opportunities for personal interactions and for all of the ceremonies and rituals and relationships that, again, can, being the operative word, can make our life rich. So yeah, in terms of photography in particular, I think there's two sides of the story. On one hand, I'm very resistant to the type of photography that takes cell phones everywhere and is constantly trying to capture the moment and in a way takes away from the experience of being present and embodied with someone. On the other hand, if photography and cameras, like any other kind of technology, are used in a conscious, deliberate manner, they can be an amazing avenue for self-reflection, for philosophical reflection. It's a way of viewing and seeing the world. And it can be an invitation to slow down and take the moment more seriously. So in that sense, yes, absolutely.
So you guessed the question, of course, when you come out with a book called Connection, and a book with the subtitle, How Technology Can Make Us Better Humans. The question, of course, is what exactly a better human is, and indeed what a human is. What's wrong, though, Dan? You're a semi-professional photographer. Your portraits are wonderful. I've been looking at your website. Anyone who's interested should follow up on looking at your work. But what's the difference between your work, which is carefully thought out, and this is what you examine in your New Yorker essay, the skill it requires in taking photographs? You quote the great photographer Bresson, who talks about, I think, the perfect moment or the ideal moment for taking a photograph, and the people who just pull out their iPhone to take a photograph when they see a nice view. Is there any difference in those two actions in terms of making us better humans? Does using one's iPhone to snap the world, does that make us worse humans?
So I would argue that it's actually not about the technology. This photo that I have right behind me, this orange, it's an orange cushion, and it was taken.
Yeah, some people will be listening to this, Dan, so you should probably describe it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So it's a photo of I was at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and I was, of course, there was amazing art on the wall, but there was also this orange cushion, and it just had this beautiful shape and color and texture. And so I snapped a photo with my iPhone, and it's in a way I call it my ode to imperfection, because when I blew it up. Of course, there's blemishes. The lens was not ideal. The lighting was not ideal, and yet it was a moment that I cherish. So I would strongly suggest that it's not about the technology; it's about the attitude and awareness that one brings to the technology. So you can be out with your iPhone and be in a very present, embodied state and take wonderful, amazing photos and portraits.
And I wonder whether that orange is taken, the orange on your wall behind you shows up also on the cover of the book Connection. Do you have a thing about orange, Dan?
I do love orange for whatever reason, but my primary request to Columbia University Press and to the designer, I didn't specify any colors. I simply wanted to avoid gadgets and widgets and wires and chips, anything that would be stereotypically thought of as current contemporary technology. I wanted to stay away from, because really my definition of technology, my way of using technology, goes back much further in history and is really much less about the artifact and much more about the relationships.
Yeah, and you are a cultural historian of the medieval period, an expert on everybody from St. Francis of Assisi to Dante, the great Italian philosopher, poet. Dan, from your historical vantage point, are we living in particularly anti-tech times? I mean, my show is, I could do a show every day on a new book that suggests that somehow technology, AI, social media, the internet is destroying humanity. Has that always been the case? Was it the case in the time of St. Francis of Assisi and Dante? Were they as obsessed with criticizing technology? Of course, they didn't have iPhones or the internet or AI, but they had technologies which, I guess, interfered, in some people's minds at least, with what it meant to be human.
Let me answer that in a few different ways, and I'll just provide a spoiler alert here. When I'm talking about technology, when people hear I'm talking about technology, they typically assume I'm talking about social media and, of course, large language models, because those are what's on our minds these days. And LLMs are a whole different story, and we can get into that. But social media, at least, I think I have a bit of an unconventional view in that my wild prediction is that 100 or 200 years from now, when historians look back, they will view this phenomena as it's been profoundly disruptive, but it's only been around for 20 years or so. And in a way, I sort of see it like a virus that we haven't quite metabolized yet. So we're still getting used to it. We're still figuring out what it means. But we're also developing new technologies to help us interact in a more fruitful way. Everything from blocks that limit the amount of time we spend on social media, on Instagram and on TikTok, to all the studies that are coming out now showing how detrimental social media can be for childhood development and so on. So I think we're gonna move past that, and again, that's maybe wildly optimistic and somewhat speculative, but that tends to be my take. In terms of what you asked about the Franciscans and Dante, the technologies that they were reacting to, St. Francis in particular, and this is a very broad definition of technology. Technology as a term itself really only goes back to the 1860s in the US context. So what I'm referring to analytically as technology during the previous times was, the mechanical arts or devices or simply materiality. So just from a definitional point of view, I wanted to emphasize that. But what was happening in the 13th century in medieval Europe was the beginnings of a commercial revolution. A lot of the mechanisms that we would recognize as modern, contemporary today had their beginnings during this time. We see the beginning of double entry bookkeeping. We have the first insurance mechanisms are taking shape. intercity trade and trade over distances from Italy into France and North Africa is taking shape. And St. Francis is really comes of age during this period in the early decades of the 1200s. And he was something of I call him a trust fund kid avant la lettre, because his father was a wealthy silk merchant. And St. Francis grew up in this family, and as the story goes, he decides he wants to renovate a church that had gone into disrepair. And so he takes some of the silk from his father's stores, sells it, donates the proceeds. And when his father calls him in and summons him to appear before the bishop and return his goods, he strips in public and returns his inheritance. And this is the beginning of the Franciscan order. So really, it was one of the first counterculture movements in Europe, and it was moving away from all of those mechanisms that could be thought of as being depersonalizing, because they were taking folks away from their families into other cities and countries, and trade was increasing, and there was just generally a sense of an increased movement of people and of goods. And I think those are all things that Francis and then later on Dante would react to.
So are you implying, at least, I know the book is quite ambitious. It's a short book, but it covers a lot of material. You bring up the Marxist Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek, the great critic of capitalism. Are you tying the origins of modernity, of modern technology, down with the origins of capitalism, particularly in your analysis of St. Francis of Assisi and double entry bookkeeping and wealthy kids rebelling against their parents? Is there a connection between our ambivalence, distrust, love-hate relationship with technology, and perhaps our love-hate relationship with capitalism?
So I think that's part of the story, though I would go back even further. And I really think of technology theoretically as everything that goes beyond the naked human body. And this, of course, ties into myth. When Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden, they were naked. The first thing they did was find fig leaves and animal skins to cover their bodies and to mitigate their shame, in a sense. And in this sense, the idea of technology is really metaphysically challenging and destabilizing, and we can come back to Žižek in that context, but it's metaphysically destabilizing because when you're thinking of technology, your technology is designed to make something better. You're trying to fix something, you're trying to improve something. So that, of course, begs the question of, is history moving is there a sense of cultural and technological evolution? Are things getting better? And I think a lot of what we see in parts of the environmental movement and parts of religious movements is this wanting to return to a pre-technological innocence, a Garden of Eden, so to speak, where technology was not a factor and things were just generally good the way they were. We also see this in folks like very loosely, folks like Graeber, who are looking back to the origins of
David Graeber, of course, who's no longer around. And intellectually or philosophically, perhaps we can trace this school back to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who sort of offers an alternative notion of progress to perhaps Marx. I mentioned this to you earlier, Dan. I know you haven't come across Kevin Ashton's new book. Kevin Ashton is a technologist who invented the phrase, the Internet of Things. He has a new book out, The Story of Stories, in which he suggests that we invented language to tell stories, that we humans have something in us that makes us want to tell stories. And that came before language. So we created words in order to tell stories. I'm reading between the lines here of what you're saying. You seem to be suggesting that we use technology, and that's a very loose term to include everything from iPhones to clothing, to also tell stories. Is that what you're trying to suggest?
So one of the stories that I like to tell actually goes back to the to Italy in the early decades of the 20th century, in the 1900s. And this is a fascinating time. There's lots going on culturally. Filippo Tommaso Marinetti was in Paris and then moved to Milan and wrote the Futurist Manifesto in 1908, which of course is kinetic, it's virile, it's masculine, it's based on the cult of speed and beauty. And what was happening in a different city, just a little to the east in Trieste, which is a port city on the Adriatic. And prior to World War I, it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And a gentleman who was writing in Trieste went by the name of Italo Svevo, which was a pen name. Literally, it means Italian and Swabian. His actual name was Ettore Schmidt. He was friends with James Joyce. James Joyce was hanging out in Trieste around the same time, and it was actually Svevo's English teacher, which is how some of his novels came to be known outside of Italy. And one of the essays that Svevo wrote was titled L'uomo e la teoria darwiniana, Man and Darwinian Theory. And in it, he tells a fable, a story of our ancestors. And he goes way, way back to the origins of civilization and speculates that at some point, man was running around in the outdoors and got tired of being walloped by the elements of nature and other beasts. So what does he do? He decides to find the biggest beast that he can find, and he finds a mammoth and says, "Hey, mammoth, let's make a deal. I'm going to scratch your back, and in return, you can protect me from the elements." And he calls this a pause. It's what gives human beings a sense of pause and a chance to develop other externalities, other implements, other tools to develop the ceremonies and the first iterations of cultural expression. And my takeaway from this fable, I think what Svevo was really getting at was that, of course, language is important, but even before language and in addition to language, the real beginnings of technology are based on the development of relationships, mutual relationships, of ways of relating to the environment, to other creatures, to other human beings.
So the social is core, tends to be something that often comes up. Another very influential philosopher at the same time, around the same time as Marinetti and your Austro-Hungarian friend Svevo, was the German cultural critic Walter Benjamin. His book, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, seems to cover a lot of the same material that you're addressing in Connection. What is the relationship, Dan, at least in your view, between modern technology, our ability to reproduce art, whether it's a photograph or a piece of music or a piece of writing, so easily in our modern age? Has that changed anything? Has it made us better or worse humans?
So I talk about Walter Benjamin in the context of a chapter about the Matrix. And Benjamin, of course, was talking about he talks about the idea of the film, the cinema, as being able to reproduce a scene and to create an environment in which you're not able to see it's almost indistinguishable from reality. So my sense of the importance here is that at the end of the day, technology is about power and who controls the storyline. So being able to identify who is telling the story, how they're telling the story, what sources they're drawing from, how they're constructing the narrative, that ultimately is what determines who has the greater sense of agency, who has the greater sense of perspective, and who is able to come away with a more compelling, I'm looking for the right words here, but just a broader view of what's actually going on. So yes, reproduction is incredibly important. But even more important, I would argue, is the sense of lineage, being able to trace the lineage, which folks do in the history of ideas. And we're seeing that now. We're seeing those challenges now with LLMs, which in some ways are amazingly creative. They come up with all sorts of material and information. But then it's really a matter of triangulating and figuring out, well, where did that come from? How did this, what sources did it derive from? Can it be validated? Does it actually match what's real in the real world?
Yeah, and this, I think in some ways, Dan, this gets back to your book, or at least the purpose of a writer, a photographer, a filmmaker these days. Is it to pass down wisdom, special kinds of wisdom, or is it to empower one's reader, one's viewer, one's listener? And you, I'm guessing, like probably most contemporary artists, wear two hats. On the one hand, in your New Yorker piece, which is adapted from one of the chapters in Connection, you quote Bresson, mentioned him earlier, his phrase, "My decisive moment as a photographer." All photographers have decisive moments where they capture the image. It's like a writer has a decisive moment when they get to a climax in the book. And yet in the introduction to your new book, Connection, you also quote Nietzsche and suggest that all readers should kind of blow your book up and start again. In your introduction, you suggest that you shouldn't begin at the beginning of Connection. You should find a later chapter, maybe 7 or 8 or 6. So what's the point of Connection, Dan? Why did you write it? Did you write it to empower your reader to blow the book up and start at chapter 7 or 8? Or did you write it to get to that decisive moment where you climax, so to speak, intellectually and reach some wise conclusion that you can pass down to your reader?
So when I think about what I really hope for a reader of my book, but really for any human being anywhere, my hope for humanity, as grandiose as that may sound, is that we would be able to recover a sense of agency. I think agency is under attack these days. It's the idea that of technological determinism, technology having the upper hand, guiding our decisions, being a system that is out of control. I really want to fight back against that, in the sense that we have that agency matters. We have an ability to make decisions that influence our lives, our personal choices, our friendships, our relationships, our communities, and we need to reclaim those. The second big idea in the book is the idea of embodiment, the sense that our felt experience matters a lot. It's fundamental. And so going back to where we started, the idea that perhaps social media will not dominate our lived existence, our felt experience in the future. Coming back to this idea of being present with people, with our communities, and with those who surround us. And so the introduction, I encourage the reader. I acknowledge that the reader will probably not read the book from cover to cover, and it's
a short book, though. They should be able to. If they
they should. Yep, it's open. But what I would actually rather people do is that they read it and gather in community and actually talk about the ideas, what they mean off the page. I hope it's an existential book that will provide perspectives and greater opportunities for choice. And there is a little bit of nostalgia, though I'm quite, I'm not a big believer in nostalgia, but if there's any nostalgia, there certainly is a sense, I think, that we've lost our ability to concentrate. I remember the days when, back in my 20s, and part of it may have just been a function of the period in life, but being able to sit down and read a Tolstoy or Dostoevsky novel cover to cover in a week or two. And I seem to have lost that ability, at least at the moment. And I think a lot of those around us have as well. And I hope we are able to get back to that. But there is a bit of a tactical retreat in the sense of, I understand that you're driven by curiosity, and you're going to read the book as you see fit, dipping into the chapters that are most appealing to you.
Yeah, it's a short book, so if you can't read this one, you're certainly not going to read Crime and Punishment or War and Peace. And those issues, of course, of reading books cover to cover is something that we've talked about endlessly on the show. And my old friend Nick Carr, the author of The Shallows, has been on the show, and he and I have talked about this in many different conversations. Dan, I'm sniffing a little bit of the cult of the social about you. What's so good about the social? Why can't we read on our own? Why do we have to talk about it to others? Why should we share our photography, our poetry, our songs? What is it about the social that makes us more human or better humans? Why can't we just be alone? I mean, other philosophers, Hobbes, for example, suggests that by nature we're solitary. And so why shouldn't we celebrate that? What's so good about the social?
I love the question because it's wonderfully ironic for me. I mean, I'm a lifelong introvert. My natural habitat is with a book on my own, and I'm perfectly comfortable in that scenario. And in fact, I think opportunities for peace and reflection are fantastic. That said, I think it was C.S. Lewis who said something to the effect, or at least it was in the movie Shadowlands. I'm not convinced that he actually said it, but the movie interpretation portrayed
If he
this.
said it in the movie, he really did say it.
Yeah, so he said
we're all hyper realists on this show.
Yeah, we read so that we so as not to feel alone, and we're able to connect with other people, their emotions, their ideas. And I think too of a wonderful, and I think you may have mentioned this too at some point, but a wonderful letter by Niccolò Machiavelli, who of course is remembered as a realpolitik political theorist and perhaps a little ruthless. But he has this wonderful letter where he talks about at the end of a long day, going back into his study and wearing distinguished robes and spending 3 or 4 hours reading the classics and feeling very much at home and very much comforted and in the company of these ideas. So I don't think it needs to be an either or. When we're reading, we're engaging with ideas across time. We're engaging with other minds, other human beings. And I think all the more reason to do that in community as well. So a little bit of both.
Yeah, I love that Machiavelli story that he donned the robes of the past, not just to think, but to write. But coming back to your point about technology making us better humans, you suggested earlier, Dan, that clothing was technology. So Machiavelli putting on the clothing of the past is in a way making him a better human. And you suggested earlier that you didn't much care for nostalgia, but Benjamin makes this point brilliantly, I think, that our love of technology is a form of nostalgia. And that might not be such a bad thing. It's, again, what makes us human.
I think of nostalgia in a couple of different ways, and I think of it as there's the viral variety, which was identified by Swiss doctors as, literally the longing to return home. And in that sense, it's something that's never going to happen. It's you can't go back into the past. You can't recreate a situation or a body politic or anything else that you're trying to recreate. Where I identify with nostalgia is in the idea of a felt sense. So we long for the days from our childhood when we felt safe and protected, or we were in a particular geography or landscape or home. And it's that emotional import that we're longing for. And that I think we can recreate thanks to our choices, thanks to how we choose to interact in the world.
Subtitle of your new book, I keep on coming back to, How Technology Can Make Us Better Humans. It's a very, very provocative subtitle. Everyone will have strong views on this. You've mentioned AI. We live in an age of AI. Recent big story was about Anthropic's fight with the US government. That Anthropic didn't trust its AI technology with the government. Anthropic has strong feelings about technology making us better humans. But isn't all technology, and particularly AI, Dan, isn't it just a reflection of us. There's no real separation between the clothing or the computers or the phones or the artificial intelligence which we make and us. So the idea of technology can make us better humans might be rephrased as humans can make us better humans.
I think I would agree with that. Ultimately, I think of technology as being embedded, and another viable subtitle for the book might have been why agency and embodiment still matter. That would have been a little bit more.
I don't know if you want to add embodiment, because that might turn people off buying the book, but certainly agency.
Agency. I guess my sense, the other big philosophical debate that the book tackles in a way is just the idea, are we living, is now the best time to be alive? And I mentioned Pinker and the idea that we generally have fewer wars, we have more peace, we have more opportunities for self-development. And there are some problems with that theory or with that idea. One of which is simply, even if we are in an age of relative peace, and I say relative, all of that could go away in the blink of an eye. In 20 minutes, we could have a nuclear holocaust or all sorts of other cataclysms. So it's a somewhat precarious time to be alive. But I think that said, I come back to the thought experiment. If I had to choose when, if I had the chance to choose when to be alive, it would be now. It would not be at any other time in the past. There's no other time in the past that I would want to go back to. And I'm cognizant of the fact that I'm sitting in a privileged state. I'm a white man living in the United States, and perhaps I would have a different take on this if I was in a mine in Central Africa or working in a factory in China.
If you could change anything, what would you have? A full head of hair, Dan?
No, I would not go back to that. This is incredibly convenient. So absolutely.
For listeners, Dan doesn't have a full head of hair, to put it politely. You look a little shocked, Dan. What would you change? Anything?
What would I change in
your current situation?
I mean, if anything, I would want to go to the future. I mean, that's what really makes me more curious.
Yeah. And you touch on some futurists, and your book is very ambitious. You write about all sorts of people, everyone from St. Francis of Assisi to Adrian Mary Brown and the great science fiction writer Octavia Butler. Let's end. There's so much to think about here. An interesting conversation, very far-ranging. Well, your academic expertise is in medieval Italy, St. Francis of Assisi, Dante. What do you think these guys, and I know it's hard to generalize, calling them these guys is a bit vulgar, but what would St. Francis of Assisi and Dante make of AI, of Anthropic, of open AI, and of our outsourcing of ourselves, our writing, our thinking, our photography to artificial intelligence, to smart machines?
I think what I'm always amazed about with Dante is just that he managed to pen the entire Divine Comedy, an amazing macrocosm of the medieval world, without really being able to use obviously to go back and edit and write and rewrite. So I think he might be rather concerned that we are losing our memories, our ability to tell us to have a coherent narrative for our life, and that our life has become too fragmented. And it's a great question. I'm trying to imagine it's Dante wanted to return to the ancient walls of Florence. So going back to Machiavelli in his robes, what Dante idealizes in the comedy and the Paradiso was actually an earlier version of Florence and what scholars have called Paleolithic chic. So he goes back to the days when folks did not wear makeup and did not wear ornate clothes. So I think he would want to go back to a much more intimate, small, congenial group of people. And I'm again coming back to the ideas about nostalgia. I'm not a proponent of that point of view because I think it's trying to reconstruct a past that will never come back.
Which you recognize and which may be the great challenge. Finally, as I said, you're a photographer. You've taken lots of wonderful photographs of all sorts of things, people, nature. Your X page is a wonderful picture of unspoiled nature. In your New Yorker piece, you talk about being in Lightroom, the Adobe software platform that enables you to manipulate photographs. What's the best experience of Lightroom for you as a photographer? What does it enable you to do as a human? How does it, in some ways, I mean, it's technology, it's hardcore technology, Lightroom. How does it make you a better human when you go into Lightroom to develop all your wonderful photographs?
So the wonderful thing about Lightroom is that you get to see a catalog of all the photographs that you've shot. So say, for example, you're taking photographs, making a portrait, and you shoot over a period of 15 or 20 or 30 minutes, and you get to see the entire range of someone's emotions. And, some of them are comical, some of them are just absurd. Folks, what's always remarkable is just how quickly human emotions change, how much expression you can see in someone's eyes and someone's micro movements, micro emotions. Micro emotions last for a fraction of a second. So on any given time, you may be thinking of a past memory of something from your childhood, of what you had yesterday for breakfast, of the current mood that you're in for whatever reason, because the weather is nice outside or because it's raining or snowing, and all of that will show up on your in your facial expressions and how you're presenting to the world. So going back in Lightroom, you have a record of that, and you see how these emotions are in real time.
Well, Dan Turello, wonderful, far-ranging conversation on many different things: philosophy, medieval Europe, photography, AI. The new book is out. It's called Connection: How Technology Can Make Us Better Humans. Best of luck, Dan, with the book, and thanks so much for appearing on the show.
Andrew, thanks so much for a wonderful and engaging conversation.
Hi, this is Andrew again. Thank you so much for listening or watching the show. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. We're on Substack, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, all the platforms. And I'd be very curious as to your comments as well on what you think of the show, how it can be improved, and the kinds of guests that you would enjoy hearing or listening to in future. Thank you again.